Right, so first we're going to need to record some audio, or you can use the audio that I provided. Apologies, I've got the sense of humour of a 12-year-old. So if you find that offensive, I do apologise.
Boobies.
So anyway, either use mine or record your own. And I'd recommend to bring it into a program like DaVinci Resolve or any other audio editing program so that you can modify the sound a little bit to make it sound more like a robot. I'll show you how to do it in DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve, by the way, is completely free. There is a paid version, but the free version, which I'm using here, is almost as fully featured as the paid version, so this will do the job just fine. Bring your audio in, and to add effects to it, all you do is you drag them on. So say I've got in the audio effects on the left hand side in the Fairlight panel, Fairlight effects settings, we've got all these settings here we can use. So I'm going to use pitch initially. So I'll bring this in, and if I play this back, if I put the timeline to the first frame first, and I'll press I, that'll add a little in marker.
Boobies.
And then I'll go to the end of the little clip I brought in and press O, and that'll set this as the in and out section. And then what we can do is turn on loop over here and just play this back.
Boobies.
And then we can increase the semitones
Boobies. Boobies.
to make it sound more.
Boobies. Boobies. Boobies.
More female. And once you've got a pitch that you like, you can then add another effect.
Boobies.
Probably a good one is the modulator. So modulation.
Boobies.
If I drag this one on,
Boobies.
we can then add modulation to this by increasing the settings we've got in here. So this is the rate of the modulation. Let's turn this up.
Boobies. Boobies.
And then so we can hear it, we have to turn the frequency level up as well.
Boobies.
And you can control how much gets passed through
Boobies.
by using the dry wet. So completely dry, you're going to get no effect.
Boobies.
And you can try different modulation shapes.
Boobies. Boobies.
And then we can filter it so it covers only a certain amount of the frequency.
Boobies.
And then we can say which part of that frequency is it going to cover.
Boobies.
So maybe something like that. And then once you've done it, once you've got the settings that you like for your particular recording, what you do, you go across to this deliver panel. We'll go to the top here on the left hand side and just choose audio only. This will make sure that the video is turned off. And we need to change this format to MP3 or WAV so it works in Blender. Give it a file name and choose somewhere to save it to under the location browse option. And click add to render queue at the bottom and it will appear over here, and then all you do is click render all. Only take a second and then it will appear in the folder wherever you've chosen over here. And then we'll go back to Blender. We're going to need to add a video editing workspace. So click on the little plus icon on the right hand side and choose under video editing, the video editing workspace. I'll just turn the seconds off because it always bothers me. So turn this off in the view settings if you want to. And then you just drag your footage in, or you can add it over here. Or if you're using this panel over here, you can drag it from there as well. So I'm going to put my timeline to the first frame, although it's not really important, you can put it wherever you want. And then just drag it in from Windows Explorer. And drop that down. And we need to be able to find a point now where we want this audio to begin playing. So I'm going to change this to a 3D viewport. I'll go into camera view. And if you've got all the trackers and things on the motion trackers, you can just turn those off over here in motion tracking. And so I can see the waveform on this. I'm just going to click over here in the side panel. If you can't see that, just press N. I'm going to turn on display waveform so I can see exactly where it happens. I'll probably turn the volume down a little bit as well. And it is a mono track, so I'm going to tick mono. And let's move the timeline now until I get to a point where I want the robot to start speaking. So I reckon probably about here. So I'm going to move this audio strip now so it starts talking just there. And try that.
Boobies.
Right. And we're also going to have the robot look towards the camera. But before I do that, I just want to animate the lips so that they move in time with this audio clip. So we'll go across to the layout view. We'll just make this a single screen now. And we'll find the robot. We'll choose the mouth. And actually, because it's going to be difficult to edit this while it's moving along, we'll actually make a duplicate of the mouth. But don't do Shift D, we're going to do Alt D, so it shares the same data. So Alt D, move that away, and then press Alt P and clear the parent. So now we've got a copy here, which won't be moving along with the rest of the robot. So this will stay static. And we'll go into the isolation view with just the mouth selected, the new mouth. We'll go into front view, and I'll press Alt G to move it back to the world origin. We can just rotate it a little bit. So Alt R, put it back to its default rotation, and then RX 90. And now we can start editing it. So let's go into the data panel down here on the right hand side, and then we'll click on shape keys and we'll add a new one. So a shape key is basically a way to animate the shape of the mesh by manually creating different versions of the mesh in edit mode, just like we used on the curve in the loop animation. So we'll click the plus icon, and this is the initial shape of the mouth. So that's the basis. And then we'll click again, and this will create a second one which we can now edit. So we'll change this one to be called closed, and we'll make this one the mouth closed. And then we'll just grab in edit mode this point here. So you've got to do it in edit mode. Make sure you've got this one selected, into edit mode, then choose a vertex. Make sure you've got proportional editing turned on, and also connected only. So connected only basically means that if I move this up like this, you can see it's affecting here because it's doing it on actual distance. Whereas if I do connected only, it's doing the distance along the mesh. So if I move that up now, you see it's only affecting the bottom there. So I'll probably select maybe a bit further. I'll press Control to select a few more. Then GZ, we'll bring that up to about here. And now we'll do the same for the top. So I'll select this one here, GZ, we'll bring it down. So the mouth's closed. And if we come back out of edit mode, you'll see it goes back to the basis. And in order to animate this, we can animate the value here or here, and it will close so that we can start animating in time to audio just by keyframing this value. Next up, we'll create one where the mouth is wide for where we do the E. So I'll create another shape key, and I'll call this one wide. Into edit mode again, making sure this one is selected. So this is the one that we're going to be editing. And I'll just take these corners. So click each corner, and I'll do SX to widen it out a bit. And I'll use the mouse wheel to change the influence. So make it a bit smaller. Maybe about here. So just check SX rather, SX. Widen that out. I'll probably take these ones and just bring these in a little bit. So just around here. So G, I'll just do this by hand. So to about here. I'll do the same on this side, just to give it a bit more shape. And then we'll probably bring these corners up a little bit as well. So select the two end corners, and I'll move them up. Maybe something like that. And then back out of edit mode. And the last one we want to do is the OO. So this one's going to be a bit of a pucker. So we'll create a new one. We'll name this one Pucker. And then we'll actually go into more of a side view. And we want the lip to sort of pucker upwards a bit at the front, pucker down at this side. So into edit mode, and I'll select probably from here, and then control click to create the path, the shortest path between the two selection points. And I'll bring this forward a bit. Maybe bring that down. In fact, let's extend this a bit further. So let's go from here to about here. Maybe one or two more. So GY, bring them out, and I can turn down the fall off about here, and I'm going to rotate it as well, so it rotates upwards like a pucker. And I'm going to go into side view, rotate that up, maybe turn the fall off a bit, and then move that up. Something like that. And then we'll do the same for the bottom. So probably from this point to around about here. Just deselect the ones I didn't want. So B, hold the middle mouse wheel down to deselect. And I'll do the same here. So I go into side view, G, bring it out. I'll rotate that down a bit as well. That's a bit more of a pucker. Maybe bring it out just a bit more. Let's bring these side points up a little. Looking quite good. And we'll probably make it a little bit thinner as well. So change the width a little. So select these side points again. I'll just scale those in and make sure as well, obviously, that you've got your pivot point set to the medium point, so it selects the point, so it pivots basically around the point between the two selections. So SX, bring those in. I'll just turn the scale up a bit. Somewhere about there. And then we can look at each of these just by clicking on them while still in edit mode. So closed, wide, and pucker. Now we'll come out of edit mode and we can start animating these in time to the audio. So we'll go back to the video editing workspace. And still with this one being the one that's selected, we're going to isolation mode so we can see only that object. We're going to front view. Now let's zoom in a bit on the audio file. We'll just turn it down a bit so it doesn't irritate you. And we can start animating these keyframes. So let's go across to the data panel. And we'll set a keyframe for all of these where we want it to still remain in the default position. So probably around about here, I'll set a keyframe for each. So they're all turned off. And then we'll go to the beginning of the audio. And if you want to be able to hear this while you scrub, in the timeline, click on this on the playback options, and then you can choose audio scrubbing. And now when I scrub across, we can hear it. So starting here, I want the mouth to be closed. So let's close that down and set a keyframe. And then when I come across to here, I want the mouth to be puckered. So I'll set this to 1, and I'll press I, and I'll just go back as well. In fact, let's turn on the dope sheet so we can see exactly what's happening. I'll widen this a little bit. And then we'll just open up the keys. Alright, so this is where nothing's happening. Everything's set to the defaults of 0. And then if we come across, it's closed. And we've got a pucker now, but I didn't want to pucker at this point. So I'm going to set this to 0 and keyframe that. So now we've got a keyframe for that. We'll do the same for wide as well. So add a keyframe here. Now come across here. So that's the oo, and I want the mouth to be open now. So I'm going to bring this back down and press I. And I come to this part here where it's the B, so the B mouth's going to be closed again. So animate this. Boob, b, 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 b. So I don't want it to be wide, and I don't want it to be puckered at this point either. So I'm going to bring that back down. Maybe not all the way, maybe it's about there. Press I. And then from this point, I want it to be the E, so the widened part. So on this one, let's make sure we set E to be fully off. So I'm going to add a keyframe while it's still on 0. Press I. And now we've got a keyframe for the wide value as well. And then we'll come forward a few frames. I'm going to widen that now. Press I. I'll turn that pucker right down. Press I again. Maybe we'll open it a slightly bit. So bring that down. Press I. And then when it goes to S, boobies, that's where I want it to start coming out. So I'll go a frame before that. And I'll just add a keyframe for all of these now. And I get to this point where it finishes. And I want it to return to normal. So let's bring this back down. And press I. Bring that back down as well. I. And that's already down, but we'll add a keyframe anyway. So let's try this.
Boobies. 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 Boobies.
I think I want to just extend this where it goes to the S. I might just make that a little bit longer so it doesn't go immediately back. Oop, I'll do that. So I'll select just this top one in this summary. Bring that across. Let's try that.
Boobies. Boobies.
Yeah, so that's looking good. Let's just have a look from the side.
Boobies. Boobies. Boobies.
Yeah. Right, so we've animated this now. This is the stand-in lips, the copy. So let's go to the layout. And I'm going to hide these. I'll just rename it as well. Let's just rename this to lips to animate. And I'll hide it in the viewport and I'll hide it in the render as well. We'll come out of isolation mode so we can see the robot. And when we play this back now, because the mouth that we animated was using the same data block as the mouth that the robot is actually using, then the animation will also be present on that original mouth.
Boobies.
So that's working.
Boobies.
Next up, let's use constraints to make the character automatically look towards the camera. Bring back the armature, so let's turn this on over here in the visibility options. I'm going to go into pose mode, select the head, and then under constraints, I want to add a look at constraint. So track 2, I'm going to choose the camera, so I press E, and I'll click on the camera up here, and you can see it looking the wrong way. So I'll change it from negative Z to Z, and now it's looking at the camera. Now in your case, you're not necessarily going to be using the same track axis as I'm using here. It all depends on how you've, which direction your bone's pointing in. So you can either trial and error to find the correct one that you need, so it's looking towards the camera, or if you want to be a bit more technical about it, you can go to the transform orientation, set it to local, make sure you turn on one of the gizmos so you can actually see the orientation. And now we can see that the head bone is, the Z positive is going that way, so the Z negative is the axis that I want to be aligning with the object I'm looking at. Don't worry too much if your custom shape that you've chosen instead of to have visible instead of the head bone doesn't align perfectly with the axis. This is just because when you've set up the custom shape in the viewport area, you've not rotated it exactly to point in line with the actual bone, and you've done that because, in my case, the lips aren't aligned with the bone, so that's why I've done it. But don't worry too much. As long as you get the right axis, we can modify. We can tweak exactly where the head is looking afterwards, which we'll come to in a second. And we can see here, because of that, the head is actually looking upwards rather than directly at the camera. So instead of getting the character to look at the camera, I'm actually going to come out of camera view, press 0 to come out of camera view. I'll set the camera, come out of pose mode, select the camera, press Shift S, and then we'll choose to cursor to selected. And I'm going to add an empty. So Shift A, empty. Any empty is fine. I'll go with let's go with a sphere. I'll just scale it down a bit. I'm going to make this the child of the camera. So go into the constraints and add a child of constraint, and we'll choose the camera. And now whenever that camera moves, this empty is going to move. But what that means is, if we get this armature, so go back into pose mode on the character, select the head, into the constraint for the bone, we can choose the empty as the target now, and that means we can actually move the empty to control the head without having to mess about changing the configuration of the pose. So if I move this up and down, you see we can get the empty to control the head, but we couldn't move the camera's position up and down, otherwise we'd obviously lose the synchronization with the video. So back into this view, and with the empty still selected, I can now move it on the Z-axis until the robot's looking directly into the camera. It's probably about there. Let's try this.
Boobies.
There we go. But what I actually want to do, rather than having the character look at the camera all the time, I just want it to look towards the camera as she begins to speak. So maybe about here. So back into pose mode, choose the head, into the constraint, and we can animate the influence. So I'll set it to 0 here, press I to add a keyframe, and then we'll come forward a little bit to about here, and then we'll set it to 1, press I, keyframe that. Let's try this.
Boobies.
And you notice it jumped back. So that's because if we go into the animation workspace, you'll see we've got this new animation on the active track in the NLA editor, and it's set, if we just click on this, it's set to extrapolation nothing, which basically means as soon as that keyframe finishes, then it's going to pop back to how it was before. So let's change this to hold forward, and now it should continue looking at the camera.
Boobies.
There we go. And I think one last thing, let's go back to layout. I'd like to, when the robot walks past, after she speaks, to probably give a bit of a grin at the camera. So about this point here, we'll have her start grinning. In order to do this, we'll go back into the lips to animate object. So select this one. Make sure you turn it on so we can see it in the viewport. I'll press dot on the keyboard, on the numpad rather. We'll go into front view and I'll just isolate it, and I'll make a new shape key for the smile. So back into the data panel, and we'll click the plus, and I'll call this one smile. Now go into edit mode, making sure this one's selected, and I'll make a sort of a smile shape. So I'll set the two end vertices, this one and this one. Make sure proportional editing is turned on, and then we've got medium point. GZ, I'll move these up until we get more of a smile. Maybe about there. Then I can also rotate these as well. So let's rotate it this way a little. And this way a little as well. And come out of edit mode. And we'll come out of isolation mode. We'll hide the lips to animate again. Zoom out, go into camera view. We'll select the head. And we'll add a keyframe at this point so that it's not smiling at all. So hover the mouse over here, press I, and now we've got a keyframe where it's closed, where it's not smiling rather. And then we'll go forward a few frames to about maybe here. I'll turn this up to a full smile. And we'll press I. Let's try playing this back.
Boobies. Boobies.
Maybe make it a little bit slower to start smiling. So I'll go into the animation workspace again. And then we've got the smile channel down at the bottom. So I'll just slide it across so it breaks out into that smile a little more gradually. Yeah, that's way better.
Boobies.
So next up, we'll get the character to look as though it's actually placed in the scene, so that all of the video footage is actually being reflected and casting bounce lighting onto the robot, just to make it look a little bit more realistic, as if the robot is actually in that video.